This is The Wilderness and the Wellspring, a podcast about the difficult times when you want to give up on your creative pursuits and the beauty of the act of creation. I'm your host, Jeff Lunt. This is episode 18, my interview with Caspian Prince of Puppygames, a UK-based indie game developer who recently completed a successful Kickstarter campaign and is trying to release their game, Battledroid, to the masses. All right, Caspian Prince, welcome to The Wilderness and the Wellspring. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, hi, Jeff.
You're a bit ill, recovering from some stuff, I hear.
Hilarious surgery.
Yeah.
Right. If it was any other part of the body, it would be, oh, you poor thing, but it's my bottom. So it's funny. Even though it's excruciating pain, you can still laugh at me.
Well, it's good. You can be in good spirits about it, I suppose.
You've got to laugh about it.
What else? What other choice you have? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have known you sort of online. Anyway, this is the first time I've ever talked to you. I've sort of known you for 20 years or so, been following a little bit of what you've been doing. I remember the earliest days in javagaming.org, which is an online gaming forum that is now basically gone. But I remember you being one of the few people that seemed to be actually shipping things in that community.
Yeah, this would have been, when did it start? JGO was around 2000-ish, wasn't it? But back then, that was the middle of that .com bubble, and everybody's going, the web is the next big thing, where you can do games on the internet. And then, so there was a lot of interest at that time in various game delivery platforms for the web browser, wasn't there? Java was one of those technologies that kind of sprang from that idea. Of course, that's exactly where it didn't go, did it?
Yeah, of all the places.
Never caught on. Mainly because it was a bit of a botched implementation and total lack of backing from Sun Microsystems at the time. So you remember Chris Melissino set up JavaGaming.org, Space Ghost, he called himself.
Yeah.
I still keep in touch with Chris now and again on LinkedIn and things, but he was pushing hard for Java and Sun Microsystems to try and, there's a multi-billion-dollar industry here. We could do something with it. And obviously the bigwigs weren't very interested in games or anything like that. Even though there were big numbers behind it, they just weren't bothered. So it never happened. It was left to people who were kind of like me to do something with it anyway. And that was a bit of a coincidence because I got into Java for work purposes. It wasn't to do games. I was just a programmer doing the usual kind of programming that programmers usually do. Typing numbers into boxes that then go to a database somewhere.
Yeah, business software of some sort.
That's 99% of most programming these days is exactly just that number box database. You couldn't really distill it down to something more tedious and boring. So I was doing that, but the specific thing that I was doing with my boxes and numbers and databases was I was running BBC election programs here in the UK. So quite a big event. Every few years there'd be a major election of some description, and I wrote the software to do all that. And to do all that stuff, we decided, well, let's try Java. I designed it all and made it all. And then while we were there with the BBC doing the live telly programs, we got talking to the graphics guys who were doing all the, because we just did the numbers. It was quite dull, but the graphics guys got to do the swingometer, a laser swingometer and stuff like that, and the little ticker tapes that run across the bottom of the screen saying who's won what. And we thought, well, we could do that because we're supplying these guys with all the results, but why don't we just do the graphics while we're at it? Because we've got direct access to the results. So, all right, how do we make Java do graphics that aren't rubbish? Because let's face it, what came with Java was pretty rubbish. So I wrote a native library to interface to OpenGL. We said, look, BBC, we can do all your graphics. And they went, no, we've got other people doing them already. Go away. So I was just left with this graphics kind of library thing that I'd written for Java. Going, what am I going to do with that? And I thought, oh, well, let's make a game out of it. And a bunch of stuff happened at more or less the same time, and I don't know the exact chronology of it, but eventually the little library that I was using to make games got open sourced, and we called it the Lightweight Java Game Library. Logical, complete tongueful, but it's pretty cool. And some Danish guys, Brian Matson, Elias now, turned up and said, we'll do the Mac and Linux ports of it, sort of thing. You do the Windows bit. So we worked on it all together for a while and made the first version of the Lightweight Java Game Library. At which point I thought, right, okay, let's make a game. Let's ship something. Let's do something. It's about 2002. We said, let's make Puppygames and try and make a game out of it. So I found my old school friend Chaz. I said, Chaz, let's make a game. We've got a sprite engine that I've written here. And off we did. We wrote a game called Alien Flux, 2003, that got released. To absolutely no fanfare whatsoever. So that's the history behind where it all started. It was just, we made a game because we could. It was an overhead game, a bit like Williams Defender. So a different take on that. It was pretty good. It was quite slick. Nobody believed it was written in Java.
It's too fast.
Well, it was, it ran at full speed, and it was only a 5 meg download. And nobody could believe, how'd you get that Java into 5 meg? Well, we cheated. We deleted everything.
I remember a lot of the chat on the forum about how, this would have been, like you said, 2003. Anything over 10 megabytes, 20 megabytes was like a non-starter. Now you got games that are a terabyte, half a terabyte. Yeah,
we had good statistics back then from companies that had been very early pioneers in the downloadable game space. It was a new thing. 2000 also, the very start of downloadable games, everything else came on CD-ROMs up to that point. And people think, you could download stuff. Now it's got a 56K modem. And that was, I think it was Reflexive Entertainment, one of the pioneers, and they had some good stats from all the different games they'd released. And it turned out the download completion rate fell off a cliff at about 10 megabytes. So basically, if you wanted people to play your game, it had to be under 10 megabytes. And a demo had to be even smaller because people are even less patient with demos. So we got the whole game down to under 10 megs. It was quite an undertaking at the time, but it involved breaking Sun's Java license terms, which was, you're not allowed to delete anything. And so, well, why not? We just pretend we've forgotten to ship it. Who's gonna know? And did know or care. Anyway, Alien Flux sold 365 copies. 6 months work.
Yeah. I remember playing that.
Wasn't a great.
Well, first of all, being impressed that you were the only desktop Java game that I knew of that had, like you said, consistent frame rates that ran on regular hardware that people had. You used the graphics accelerator, right? Which was also not something anybody was really doing much. And then I also, specifically gameplay-wise, I remember the control scheme. It's been a long time now, but it was like left hand move around and then right hand with the mouse. The camera would kind of move to wherever you were pointing, which I thought was really clever. Just made it really easy to like see where you're going, see where you're shooting, that kind of thing. Yeah,
I actually came out with that design a good 10 years previously for a game I wrote on the Amiga. Alien Flux itself was a rewrite of a game I wrote on the Amiga, which came out in the 1993 Christmas edition of the Amiga Format magazine. And it was called Zap with an X. But that's a bit of history that nobody's ever I can't find it anymore, so it's gone forever. The controls, I like to be able to play games with just one hand if I can. So if I can get all the controls on a mouse, that's perfection. But it did work well with the keyboard as well. But I developed it all with one hand. Did the same with Basingstoke as well later. I made sure that the game could be played entirely from one hand and enough buttons. Yeah, frame rates. This staggers me even now. Here we are 20 years later, and it's like, bless them, they're doing a great job at everything else. But the Java FX team will go, look, a demonstration. I've got 100 sprites at 60 frames a second bouncing around in my box here. It's like 100 crap sprites jerking around. It's like, we're doing like 25,000 sprites 20 years ago. Yeah. Like, seriously, our peak sprite pushing was, I think, about 25,000 sprites per frame running at 60 frames a second on crappy old Java on these old machines. It's like, I don't know how everything. It's like Unity. You try to do this in Unity. Like, you do amazing 3D shaders and fancy effects and anything, but 50 sprites. Oh no, collapse 2 frames a second. If you're trying to do 50 sprites. So why is it so hard? Why are sprites so difficult? I don't know.
I remember at the time I was only a couple of years into learning Java, and so I was also experimenting with what was it called, Swing, which was like the desktop UI stuff. Yeah. And I remember all the configuration around like the look and feel. And yet, I messed around with that for a year or so. And no matter what you did, it all looked like crap. And anyway, and you could publish something that would, I guess, look the same or kind of close to the same across platforms, but they all looked equally terrible. And then you could try to do some kind of like native look and feel, but then you had all these cross-platform layout problems, and it was just a mess.
I've had some success at this, I'd say commercially, but my day job is I'm a contract programmer, and I still type numbers into boxes and go into databases, but I do them now with pretty nice looking user interfaces that I still do in Java and Swing, sometimes Java FX. Well, I've worked out now how to make them look good and behave nicely and fix all in the layout managers. But yeah, I'm quite good at it now, and I'm pleased to say it's probably one of the best UI toolkits there is now. If you want to get something done and get it working, Java Swing is probably still one of the best you can do, believe it or not.
Huh, okay.
So I've yet to come across something. I've done some C++ Qt stuff, and that's just a nightmare by comparison. Not least because you're using C++ and everything takes 3 times as long. breaks for unknown reasons. But
yeah, I eventually switched to the web, and then at least you get somewhat consistent layout stuff. But then you
I've been avoiding the web.
Oh yeah,
I
didn't notice
it. I can't get my head around having to use such awful, crappy languages like JavaScript to get stuff done when we've had all this advancement in other areas, and then you have to go back to the Stone Age and run interpreted stuff that's slow and has no error checking before you try it and things like that. And it's like, this is just annoying. I mean, it would have been nice, but I just couldn't be bothered. I thought I'll leave it up to other people. And sure enough, World Plus Dog does it now, so it's not a particularly valuable skill to have anymore anyway. It's a commodity skill, something I can get other people to do.
Yeah. I remember in the early days, there was also some attempt to build a handheld console that ran Java bytecode natively, if I remember correctly. And there were some other fits and starts around trying to figure out how to get games in Java to mesh.
So Spazzy and I from the Lightweight Java Game Project were approached by Panasonic. I think this is way beyond any NDA we might have had now, but in 2009, I think it was. And they had this handheld Java games console they were making. And they wanted a lightweight Java game library to run on it, basically, so they would have a ready-to-go 3D graphics library that would run Java on this device. Then Google suddenly threw their weight behind Android big time, and Panasonic must have instantly realized what the implications for this were, that any other handheld device of the same form factor as a phone was going to just get blown into the weeds. So they gave up on it. They pulled the plug very, very early. And kudos to them for realizing it, because it would have been a disaster if they tried to release a handheld game console at the same time as Google was going, here's our new Android phone. You can play games on it. Look, here's 1 million games. And it's like,
yeah,
they're all free. So 2009, the iPhone was really beginning to storm everything as well. It was properly taken off, wasn't it? It's like smartphone heyday. Yeah, it was good. Had a prototype board, the LCD screwed to it and things like that, and wires everywhere. Would have been exciting. Just, it was 3 years too late.
How well did it work? I mean, with the dev board and everything?
Well, it worked. It was, the ARM hardware available at the time. So, it was basically just an Android phone, but without any phone. You can see why it was such a crap idea, can't you? It's like one of these, but it doesn't do all of the other useful stuff that you like. So yeah, phones completely destroyed the idea. It was interesting to see, not too long after that Nintendo came along with the Switch and revived the handheld platform somewhat. And then, what's the other one? Steam Deck. I've got a Steam Deck right here in front of me, actually. Remarkable piece of kit. It's incredible. It's like a tiny laptop without a keyboard. It's really powerful. I was really surprised to find it runs Battledroid perfectly well. It's like, wasn't expecting it to run, but it does. So that's nice. Yes, that's the mobile gaming market for me. I don't do it.
Yeah. The Panasonic thing was a dedicated console. That's all it was intended to do?
Yeah, I think that was all it was intended to be, was a dedicated console. And they were thinking Java because it's easy, and it meant they could evolve their hardware underneath it without having to think too closely about having everybody recompile their games every time they iterated on it.
I see.
Which is, of course, where Android came from with their Dalvik stuff, was the idea. You wouldn't have to keep recompiling stuff if the chipset ever changed significantly. Of course, it's been stuck on ARM ever since, pretty much. But
yeah, that's true.
You never know. Maybe some RISC-V will change that. We don't know.
So you're working on Lightweight Java Game Library. You did Alien Flux, a couple other things, doing the BBC stuff. So Alien Flux was the beginning of Puppygames, I take it? Sort of officially or publicly?
Kind of. We'd gotten together a couple of years earlier, Chaz and I had, under the name of Shaven Puppy Limited.
Oh, I vaguely remember seeing that name, yeah.
So Shaven Puppy Limited is actually the legal name for Puppygames. We just trade as Puppygames because it's a tiny bit more family-friendly than Shaven Puppy, right? However, I do all my business invoicing through Shaven Puppy, and it always gets double takes from the accountants. Who? Yeah, so I got together with Chaz a couple of years before. I had a bit of money lying around. I said, Chaz, can we try prototyping? We just had this idea. We tried prototyping a game. It's called Multiple Injury. We might still revisit this game, but it was a multiplayer online game that involved squads. It was a bit like, did you ever play a game called, what was that game by Sensible Software where you had a little squad of men?
Fire Team?
Cannon Fodder.
Oh, Cannon Fodder.
Did you ever play Cannon Fodder on the Amiga?
I never had an Amiga, but I think I played a port of Cannon Fodder.
You control a small squad of men, and they have a little mission to do, and you kind of control them all simultaneously, and they sort of take care of themselves around what you're generally trying to make them do, which is basically move somewhere or shoot at something. And so multiple injury was a game that I could see that was, we could do this a multiplayer game. Everybody has squads and they run around just shooting each other and finding upgrades. Anyway, needless to say, we had no idea what we were doing. It was far too complicated, much bigger task than we possibly realized. Got nowhere with it. Spent, a year and a half on it or something like that. And then realized we were going to go nowhere. So we had this game design based around cannon fodder, a multiplayer game, which involved networking, 3D graphics, squad-based behavior, you name it. It was about as complicated as two people could think of as being a game in 2000. So needless to say, we got nowhere. But, of course, we had all the sprite library and everything like that we developed for it and gotten everything to work with. Alien Flux was the epiphany moment when we realized, hang on, if we just try and do something that's within the scope of a sensible game, we could make Alien Flux, which is how that came about. We did make a couple more games after Alien Flux that nobody knew about. There's one called Super Dudester. Do you remember that?
I don't think I played that one.
It was a bizarre game, just a sort of hallucinatory, psychedelic experience. We released it and nobody noticed at all. It didn't sell any copies at all. But it did win an award from Sun Microsystems. They did an award. I don't know if you remember. And must have been about 3 people must have entered this competition. And I think Super Dudester was the only one that was even remotely credibly like a finished computer game. So we won by default, I think. I won a computer and a monitor from Sun, which is really nice. And I used them for years and years later. So anyway, so that was the early days, getting nowhere, then finally realizing what we could actually do.
Not a lot of support from Sun either. I mean, I think for a while in the forums, we had like some guy, I forget his name, that worked at Sun.
Yeah.
What's that?
There was Jeff Kesselman. He was working at Sun on the servery stuff. He was trying to convince the Sun guys that there's some mileage in Java on the server here. Mm-hmm. If only they knew. It turns out now Java dominates the server ecosystem completely. And what else? There was Ken Russell as well. He now works at Google. I think he's been working at Google ever since. He was on the Java 2D team, I think. Mm. But it was Chris, Jeff, and Ken from Sun Microsystems. I think there might have been another one of the guys there who was possibly involved in the Java FX stuff at some point. But it was Java 3D had a presence there. Java 3D was terribly lame.
Forgot about Java 3D. Yeah,
it's just terrible. I know they meant well, but it was not fit to do anything useful, so nobody used it for anything sensible.
Do you have any insight to the discussions within Sun or through anybody as to like why nobody ever picked it up, or Sun just didn't care that much about game side or entertainment?
Well, little were we know that of course, the Sun execs were trying to sell the whole thing. They were looking for their out at this point. Obviously, it's sold in 2005, I think, wasn't it? That must have taken a good couple of years in the planning. So even if they were interested by the time 2003 came around and we made something that looked like it might be half decent, they were already probably thinking about getting shot of the thing. So they weren't trying to plug that at all. And it's a shame because there were lots of noises made about JVM ending up on the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. What we realized is that just having a JVM is only half the puzzle. You need APIs that are consistent across platforms as well, like Swing. You need something like that works on the PlayStation. The PlayStation 2 at the time did not have a proper OpenGL API or anything like that. So that was the only other cross-platform API that was around at the time that would work on Linux, Mac, and Windows. And even then with some coercion. So see that not happening. But if they managed to get their agreements in place a little bit more, maybe the next generation of PlayStation could have been something with that. As it is, I think it's still not there. There's no Java presence in any consoles whatsoever. And it's a crying shame that, Unity, C# and Mono have made it there and Java didn't. It's just irritation.
Yeah, I suppose you have the Steam Deck, but it's not really... Like, it just runs generic programs, so whatever language, it doesn't care.
It so happens to run Java perfectly well because it's just a Linux laptop, isn't it, really? So it does. It's surprisingly good. Tip-top performance. It's actually better than my laptop at work somehow.
Does it have the sort of Linux input delay problems with the joysticks or anything?
Don't seem to notice anything of that nature. I imagine they've specifically tuned it out on the Steam Deck. Since I switched permanently to Linux for my desktop 6 months ago now, 5-6 months ago, I haven't noticed anything particularly difficult about it or rubbish. It's just the occasional weird thing, like why didn't the sound work earlier? I don't know. It's just misbehaving. Could be part of a hardware fault anyway. I don't know. But it's all pretty smooth. It seems to work. Everything largely runs just fine without any alteration at all. So I think I'll stick with it.
So how far did you get with Puppygames? So at first it was just you and Chaz, right? For quite a while?
Yeah.
And
Ages.
then at what point did you, I presume now, like if Battledroid kind of took off, you would at least consider that being like your full-time focus, or what's the plan there?
If Battledroid does take off, it will be my full-time focus. So we're working on something on that front. Can't give you the exact details yet, but they'll be fairly obvious when they happen. But we did spend a bit of time, about 5 years, completely independent developers, about 2010 to 2015 or so, because Revenge of the Titans did so well when we finally released it in tail end of 2009 in the Humble Indie Bundle 2. I quit my job at Sodi, Basingstoke of all places, and went full time and spent 5 years living off the money and doing sales of Revenge of the Titans. And it did quite well, but we couldn't quite get it together to figure out what game to make next. We'd made 3 games prior to this: Titan Attacks, Ultratron, Droid Assault. There were 3 little arcade games. We made Revenge of the Titans. That was our big one, our big time. So we ported all of our old previous 3 games onto Steam and made them prettier, did high-res versions. That kept money coming in for about 4 or 5 years. Thought of the concept of Battledroid way back in 2010, literally just after Revenge of the Titans was released, because people kept on asking us, can we have multiplayer? As was the fashion back in 2010. So just add multiplayer, man.
Yeah, just sprinkle it on.
I think I spent about 6 months designing Battledroid to work. I didn't even write a line of code, just scribbling on bits of paper, trying to figure out a game. How do you make a multiplayer Revenge of the Titans? Script. Not as easy as it sounds. There's all sorts of stuff you've got to worry about based on your capabilities and how many people are likely to play it. When are they going to be able to play it? How much are they going to pay for it? And you have to think, well, we're an indie company. It's just me and Chaz. If we release a multiplayer game, how many people are going to turn up? Well, nobody, because that's what happens to every other indie games developer. They make some massively multiplayer indie game, and then 6 people on the server, and everybody goes, this is boring, and they all bugger off, and it's dead within, it's just tumbleweed in a couple of weeks. So we had to come up with a design that would work with the fact that we weren't going to have thousands of players turn up and play the game all the time. We're going to have like 5. How do you make a game like that? So that's where the asynchronous online aspect came from with Battledroid. It was a way of working around the fact that we won't ever be popular enough to have a proper online game. And then, of course, Revenge of the Titans is a one-sided game. It's a tower defense. You're basically defending a base. But when you have a multiplayer game, you've got 2 players. And you say, well, how do you do the attack part? That's the point. And how do you do the attack part if the other guy's not even playing? Because he's not there. It's like, oh, all right. So that's where the whole design has eventually come out of Battledroid. So one thing just had to lead to another to make it work. That's all the pieces just ended up that way. And then making it free was just another weird decision we decided because, well, we saw the way the games market was going even back in 2010. We thought, well, people are getting more and more reluctant to pay any money for computer games. And then when they do, that's all the money they're ever going to give you for it. Whereas free games had this thing where most people didn't give you anything, but the ones who did think like it would keep giving you money for it. So then you would naturally have a bunch of people who are filtered at self-filtering to want to play a game and enjoy it and like giving you money, which is just the perfect combination of people, isn't it?
Right.
Exactly what you want. So we thought, and it was, that was another major aspect of the design there. How did we get onto that?
I think we're just talking about the history of, Puppygames, kind of how things evolved and the idea of going full time at some point.
Yeah. So anyway, we went full time and then ran out of money, obviously. By about 2014, the coffers were looking quite thin and we thought, this is not going to work. So we decided, let's make a little 3-month game called Basingstoke. It's just an idea. It was just a game where you, escape from Basingstoke, run away from monsters. Right? There we go. Plan hatched. Then maybe that'll make us some money. 3 months later, it became obvious the game was going to take a bit longer. Anyway, it took 4 years to make Basingstoke. In the meantime, we ran out of money properly. So I went back into contracting, putting numbers into boxes and going to databases. And I funded Puppygames for the next 4 or 5 years based on that. And then we released Basingstoke and that made a bit more money come in. So I didn't have to fund Puppygames directly. But I've remained contracting ever since because I've still not got any money.
Sure. Yeah, well, got to have a roof over your head and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Just living hand to mouth all the time. So we've always been on a shoestring. While I was contracting, about 2016 or so, another guy from JGO turned up, and he was called the Agent D, which is his handle on the internet in lots of places. That super attack programmer Dan. Turns out when I met him in something like 2014 or something, when he was on JGO, he was about 14 years old. he was really young. Maybe back in 2003 or something. But he'd been following me for ages. Anyway, it turns out Dan's really clever, right? He's the cleverest person you'll ever meet. And he said, why don't we do Battledroid in 3D? Prototyped it in 2D by this point, but got nowhere. And he's like, oh, all right, then, yeah, why not? Let's try doing it in 3D. We'll make our own engine.
Yeah.
Genius. Genius, yes, let's make our own engine, because every sensible game developer does that. So we did, and we have, and Dan made it. Dan's made our voxel engine, and it's amazing. It's just taken us 10 years.
It does look great. I mean,
about 8 years since he started. Yeah, we started that in 2016, and it's now the state it's in now. And he's still improving it and making it do more amazing things. So it's really good.
I think you guys use it to great effect in Battledroid, because there's these different environments and weather and night and day and all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's a strange decision in some ways to be like, let's build our own. But hey, it doesn't feel at all like a distraction from the game, right?
Well, yeah, we prototyped the style in Unity. Chaz did some Unity stuff with voxels, and it all seemed to go very well, providing it was just rendering stuff and not actually playing a game, and there weren't that many robots. But Unity would rapidly plummet down to 30 frames a second or something when there's a lot going on. And of course, there was no logic happening in his little tech demos where he showed off his models walking around shooting each other. They were just shorts she'd staged. So the thing about the Voxoid engine that Dan's made is it's extraordinarily efficient. I mean, it's really, really fast. Battledroid barely pushes it at all. Renders the whole frame in like 3 milliseconds. It's just incredible. All the rest of it's all just my shoddy games programming on top. It needs a lot more optimization. And we've got plans for it. But it's such a good engine, we can't just leave it in one game. There's a few other designs of games that I want to make with it. But we'll see how much time I get to do that, because Battledroid's going to be still a big development for the next few years. Loads of stuff to add to it. It's going to be a very complicated and deep game for grown-ups.
Well, it's well on its way, too. I mean, is it taking a while to build up the Discord and stuff? I only joined the Discord recently in a few months. Well,
we were doing really well with the Discord until about February, when it got massively hacked by these clever social engineering. I got absolutely totally owned, lost our server, lost my handle, lost everything, and all the people that were in the old server. But a bunch of them have made their way back, and it's a lovely, friendly little place now. Lots of positive discussion about the game. People being very polite, attacking each other. It's really nice watching them all blow each other up and enjoying it rather than getting griefy, because that's the whole point of the game, is to blow each other's stuff up. Don't have to be upset by it. But yeah, they're a really, really nice bunch of guys. So that's what's going on in the Discord. Lots of active participation in game design and bug finding going on as well. So we have a load of really good discussions on there.
Did it take a while to, so you started, you and Chaz, who you'd kind of known for a long time, Dan came along. Was it just kind of a series of, you meet somebody, you bring them in, you talk to them, and over time you kind of integrate? Was it more intentional than that?
Kind of. I worked for a year or so briefly with a guy from JGO called Skip, and he helped me write some code, the early prototypes of Battledroid, for a year, just on a contract basis. Just need an extra pair of hands. And then for Basingstoke, we had Justin. He was the main programmer on Basingstoke. We did 90% of the code on it, and he spent the whole 4 years making it. He was actually an employee. We employed him to do it, but unfortunately, Basingstoke made absolutely no money whatsoever, so we couldn't afford to keep him after release. It was a real shame. I don't know why. I don't know why it did quite as badly as it did. I think it'll do better in the near future, though, because we have a release coming out.
You do.
We do. We have a console release.
A Basingstoke?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. You're one of the first to find out. It's nearly ready. So just have to wait for the wheels to get into motion, because publishing things on consoles is a lot more tricky than Steam. It takes months and months.
What are the major differences, you think?
Well, mainly bureaucracy. Microsoft and Sony are very, very bureaucratic about the way they deal with everything. Awful lot of hoops to jump through, quality control gates, specific requirements that are just for their console. Like you have to have these 3 achievements set up for whatever, for gold, silver, and platinum, or whatever. All that stuff you just don't think about. It's all there, but they're all actually mandatory for consoles. So you have to follow all of these rules. So they're doing all of that kind of thing, getting all that stuff set up, and then they've got to get a release window, and it's complicated. Fortunately, I'm not dealing with any of it myself.
Oh, okay.
We have a bunch of great guys behind it who you'll find out about eventually, who are really good at doing this. They've been patiently working with us for the last 2 years to get Basingstoke over onto the console. Then the riches. No, I'm joking. Might pay off a bit more of my car loan.
So why do you think the Sony and Microsoft model for taking games through the pipeline wound up the way it is versus, I haven't released a Steam game, but I get the impression that it's more asynchronous and there's fewer hoops to jump through these days compared to the consoles?
Very many fewer hoops. The quality control is considerably lower. It is there. They do have some arbitrarily irritating restrictions, which is just annoying as hell. They're doing that thing that Apple do, where you're not allowed to have links to other places where you could buy the game and stuff like that. I think that's a little out of order. Of
You're talking about Steam?
Monopoly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. There are some onerous restrictions which we're not happy about that have been introduced over the years deliberately. And it's like, it wasn't necessary. They didn't need to do this stuff because they already had the monopoly over the market by about 2010. Mm-hmm. They didn't need to do it. So yeah, nil point, Valve for screwing that thing over. Microsoft and Sony have a much tighter ship. Their operations are a much more, I would say, professional affair with a lot more people involved and a lot more money going around. Because if you screw something up on Steam, you can patch it literally within 5 minutes. I do that all the time. I go, oops, left dot off an I or a T crossed, uncrossed. Just upload another patch. It's live within 5 minutes. It takes like 3 months or something on the Xbox, so you can't screw up. You've got to get it right. Nothing glaringly obvious because it won't get through QA for a start, and if it's found afterwards, it's frowned upon. So it's only a step forward from the old-fashioned way of doing things, which was, literally a CD on a shelf. If you screwed that up, you really were in trouble.
You're done.
So you print 100,000 copies of something that didn't work, like that would be the end of you. So I can see why they do it. It's just to be expected. They're running a tighter ship than Valve, who are much more slapdash.
Do you get a lot more support from Sony and Microsoft as a result? Like,
I don't know, because I refuse to deal with them directly because I can't be bothered. That's one of the whole reasons to have a publisher porter to do this kind of thing for you. It's just like they know how to deal with these guys and they can be bothered to deal with it. Whereas I'm just programming. I just like to make games. Don't have to deal with that kind of thing. Valve is as complicated as I can be bothered to get, and they are fiddly even so. It's probably worth mentioning music, sound effects. I do most of the sound effects in the games, and occasionally had some help with some of the better ones. But music we've had done for our games has always been, in my opinion, spectacular. And I can say this because I didn't make it. Right? I can blow somebody else's trumpet, but music for Revenge of the Titans was really quite something. We had this EP you could get, downloadable soundtrack. It's brilliant. Covers of Death of Mary, Queen of Scots, done on synths after A Clockwork Orange by what's the name? Wendy. I got her name. Great piece of synth music. There's Pink Floyd and Kate Bush and all kinds of other stuff in Revenge of the Titans. There's Bach's Toccata in D fugue, Toccata in D minor and fugue, which is the title screen music. Anyway, that was all done by Dave Sonnerton Bell. He has his own little music label called Strange and Delicious. And he's a really interesting chap. He's currently working with someone called Nomi, who's in a band that you might have heard of called Queen Adrena, and was involved also in stuff like Daisy Chainsaw back in the 90s.
You play an instrument?
Me? No. I could get a guitar out and go, never had a single lesson. But no, I can't play any instruments, which is a great regret, but it's just the way it is. Dave, however, is supremely musically talented. And we've also, Justin, in other words, who did Basingstoke. He did all the music for Basingstoke, but he also did the absolutely banging electronic dance music in Ultratron, which is also available as a separate album. It's really good. It's just to listen to. If you're going to do some work and you want to work fast, listen to the Ultratron soundtrack. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. We musicians come and go, but we're always on the listening out for good stuff, particularly with friends. So
I have a sort of a question off of that. So being more on the programming on the back side, did you find it challenging at all to sort of integrate people on the more graphics and audio and music side? Or
no, not at all. No, it's really easy. Good thing about a really small indie game development is we naturally fit into our own roles and don't have an awful lot of overlap in them. Chaz does graphics, I do games programming, Dan does engines, Dave would do music. there's a tiny little bit of overlap. Sometimes Chaz would write some code and I'd have to face palm and fix it all afterwards. Or I'd do some graphics and he'd face palm and replace them ones that look good. Or Dan would look at my code and face palm and make it fast. And I'd look at Dan's code and go, Dan, why don't you ever comment anything? But by and large, we all have such distinct roles that integration has always been really easy. Getting us all to work together. We've never all worked in the same building for 20 years. We've always been remote. Chaz spent most of the last decade in Spain, and he was in Thailand before that, and he was in Korea as well, South Korea for a while, and Mexico. He's been everywhere, but we've never worked together in the same room on the same game. And I only met Dan for the first time a couple of years ago. He's like, he's from Sweden.
And you met him? Did you meet him in person, or?
Yeah, he came over especially to come and visit because I'd never met him before. I said, "Yeah, come over. I come and stay for a few days."
That's cool.
I can't remember what he might have been doing something else while he was here, but we had him up. We also did a show together in London, one of the various shows that are about way back when. Can't remember when, in the mid 2010s. So that was the first time I met him, but the first time we properly, it was odd having known him since he was a kid. And finally meeting him, he's actually grown up now because, of course, 10 years have gone by. And now me, I'm getting old. I've just suddenly realised I'm 50. I'm 51. That's old in the games industry. There's almost nobody in the games industry in their 50s. I wondered why for a long time, and it's because it's rubbish. There's nobody in their right mind would want to be in the games industry. It's far too much work.
Yeah. I mean, when I got into programming, my goal was always to do games, but then I think right around 2002 or so, I was considering trying to just get any job at a game studio, like QA stuff or customer service or whatever. And I knew someone who had worked in the games industry, and I was asking them their opinion. And it was like, some crappy job at Blizzard or something. And I was like, what do you think about this? And they're like, that sounds like a hellish job. If you want to do that, go for it. But that was also the time where a lot more news around people's dissatisfaction with the working conditions at EA and all that stuff were coming out. And so the grind part of it just started to become way more public. And so I was like, I think I'll just have a regular day job and do game stuff here and there.
Sensible. So I did the less sensible thing of having a regular job and doing the game stuff all the time on top of it. So for most of the last decade, I've done a 60-hour week.
Oof.
I do a full week's work on contracting, and then every waking hour of the day, otherwise, to the exclusion of pretty much everything else. I don't watch telly, I don't read books, I don't do anything with anyone anymore. Just writing this stupid computer game. Right? Or the other, and it's been overwhelmingly too much at some point, actually. I think something had to give. Battledroid has to be successful, otherwise I'm going to have to give up or it'll kill me. And my wife will be particularly cross if I die. Because I'm not worth anything yet.
Don't die until you're rich. You could leave some sort of a...
Yeah, exactly. It'd be nice if Battledroid is really successful, and then just as I receive the check, I fall dead in my chair. Stone cold. Success at last. Which would be just typical. But yeah, because when I started making it, I was still young, and now I'm 50. It's like, I'm not young. So, but I'd say things are changing on that front. I might be full time on the game again.
Okay.
Progress is very quick when I'm full time. You come home from work having done 8 hours, then try and sit down in front of exactly the same IDE, doing the same language.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, looks just like being at work still, like I've been all day already. So I would not get too much done in the evenings, a couple of hours, and then I'd be exhausted and have to go to work again, having worked till 2 a.m.
Yeah, it's a rough cycle to maintain for sure.
Yeah, it's taken so long as well because I've been part-time that it's been really annoying, like Chaz. I think, if you pardon my French, to quote Chaz, he said, "This game is a fucking albatross." he really got sick of it a few months back. It's like, we have been working on it for ages and we haven't got anywhere. We've not released it. That was the point when I said, maybe we should try this Kickstarter. Maybe we should see if we could get enough money to release it, get it over the line. And we have. Obviously, it's been just about successful enough to buy a few months of Chaz's time. Sadly, not me, because now been hospitalised and off work for weeks. All the money's gone. I've spent all mine already just not being at work, so that was a shame. But anyhow, Chaz is the important thing here. You can get on with it while I'm, doing stuff in the evenings as usual. Something's going to happen on those lines. I can't announce it yet because it's not signed, but it's a good thing. It means full-time working on game, and I think that'll please quite a lot of people because there seems to be a lot of people playing it. It's usually about 5 to 6 people simultaneously online playing it since we released the demo a month and a bit ago, Steam Next Fest, which is quite promising. In the original, when you released the game, when it started, there was an empty world, 250,000 territories on it, and it just looked barren, nothing there. You zoom out, the little hexes are so small that they're not even as big as pixels. There's that many territories. Oh God, how is anybody ever going to fill the world up? It's filling up. Just the few hundred players, fighting all over the place and attacking each other. And it'll be interesting to see when it's full eventually, because then there's going to be a real fight. when there's nowhere left, it's just kind of like, I'll have that then. So, we're going to have to fight for it. Yeah.
So you mentioned Chaz reaching kind of a frustration point before the Kickstarter. Do you think the Kickstarter, having been successful now, changes priorities or your focus? You mentioned like Chaz's time is paid for a little while, at least. That'll help.
It has changed. It's relieved a lot of pressure on Chaz because we're broke. I mean, I'm not earning very much money at the moment, even contracting. And I didn't have enough money to pay Chaz because I've been basically funding Chaz all these years whenever necessary, but run out. There's like, oh, shit, really on the breadline here. There's not a lot of cash going around and I haven't got enough money for me. So the Kickstarter really, really alleviated things. And then the promise of good stuff happening in the near future has also cheered him up a bit. So, I mean, one of his frustrations is that Chaz got to play with Unity when he did Basingstoke, and he really likes Unity because it makes doing stuff for artists really easy. He can stick stuff in games and prototype it and try it out really quickly and fiddle around with it. Who cares if it only runs at 12 frames a second? But he wants it. Whereas all of our Java stuff is all proprietary and all difficult and has bugs in it which only I can fix. No documentation for half of it. And he's very frustrated by working in Java. Annoys the hell out of him. But of course, he doesn't have to write any of the back-end server stuff. So that's my problem. But yeah, that's going all right now.
Was part of Chaz's frustration just like not feeling like there was any kind of launch date or anything? Was it that as well?
Yeah, it's just like, we're never going to get this game out, are we? It's just like we just keep fiddling with it. I mean, we spent a whole year last year trying a big log experiment with some game design aspects, resource management, try and make the game more interesting, but it was actually just numbers for the sake of numbers. So I got rid of it. It was quite painful. I spent months on it and then had to undo it all, literally rip it all out and spent another couple of months just getting rid of it again. You have to do that. You've got to, when you're designing a game, it's got to be perfect. Otherwise, everybody will point it out and will go, this is boring. So yeah, a year down the drain just working on that and then getting rid of it all. But at least it helped me focus on what needed to be done. The current design of the game is close, I'd say, to being what it needs to be. I'm thinking about some stuff about alternative resource management as well. So bringing back some aspects of the stuff that we threw away, but not all of them, just a couple of subtle ones to achieve some objectives that we need to do. Say with game balance, just the difficult thing. Game balance is the really hard thing in Battledroid, is figuring out how to make sure that everybody can have fun all the time.
That's the goal, of course, right? Yeah,
that is the goal, but it's actually harder than it sounds because sometimes people having fun means other people having no fun. There's a lot of online games out there, and we get a lot of this was people whining. They go, "Oh, it's just pay to win," and that's how some people get their fun. It's just paying to beat everybody else by being better than by having more money. We were compared to, I think there's a game called Clash of Clans, which mercifully I have not seen. Some kind of mobile game, I think, with a similar premise to Battledroid, in that you build bases, but then you go on raids with your friends and go and attack other people's bases. But I'm led to believe that it's largely money driven, and if you want to win, you just pay more money.
Not much of a level playing field, huh?
No, but it doesn't stop them from making more money than everyone else, though.
It's true, yeah.
Because it turns out a lot of people really want that. They just want to pay money to win. But unfortunately, this is at other people's expense. I didn't want that in the design, so I've been quite painstakingly trying to make sure that you cannot pay to win, but there's still an incentive to pay some money to the game, because obviously it needs to be sufficient for us to keep developing it.
So you're talking about game balance. I remember years ago you wrote this blog post about, at the time in the games industry, people were grappling with the first versions of play to win and microtransactions and stuff like that. And I remember you making a point, something like, well, hey, some people have time and some people have money, and you didn't see any reason that they couldn't both be in the same game and have fun.
Yeah, and that's the whole premise behind how we designed Battledroid. It's for people without money play against people with money, but without either of them having a rubbish time because of the relative lack of one or the other of the attributes. So, people without money generally have time. That's why they haven't got any money. They can afford to just play the game and advance, grind their way through things, collect stuff slowly, build things up without ever having to pay a penny. In the meantime, leaving a whole bunch of stuff for people with money to come and blow up. So you got some money, right? I'm going to buy myself an army of robots, and I'm going to go blow stuff up, and that's where I get my fun. And the free players can be generating the content for them. So it's like a Venn diagram of user-generated content and players with money and players with time. And the perfect intersection between all three is the design we tried to get to with Battledroid. And I think it's working. It's been misunderstood. The game's nothing like Clash of Clans. You can't pay to win. It's very much like Warhammer 40k. In Clash of Clans, I believe, I don't know because I still haven't actually seen it or even played it. I believe you consume stuff constantly. You create a load of Ghidras to go and attack some base, and if they die, then they die, and you have to wait for more of them to get made or something like that. So ignorant talking to the ignorant there. We don't know. But it's constant consumption kind of game and paying to win like that. Our game is like Warhammer 40k. You collect miniatures and they're yours. You don't ever give them to anyone else and say, there you go, you've blown it up, or you don't smash them with a hammer afterwards. They're your miniatures. You take them around other people's houses and play with them. That's exactly how Battledroid is. Every hex is somebody else's house. You turn up with your army in a box set, open the lid, look at all my shiny robots. They say, right, well, I've set up my army over here, but there's only 2,000 points of army. So you can't put your 3 big battle droids in the field because they'll wipe them out, because that's 3,000 points worth of robots. So we have a built-in mechanism in the game that allows the defender to call the shots and say, right, this is how many points you got, you can try and attack me with. So they can make a 10,000 point defense if they want, and then you can try your 10,000 points worth of army to try and defeat them, or they could just make a little one. And in this way, it means a beginner player can't just be overwhelmed by outrageously powerful armies that they can't possibly attack, because they can still go for smaller attacks, which they have a hope of winning because they've got the same amount of points they can field. Obviously, there's more balancing to be done on it all, but it seems to be working quite well, and it's worked for Warhammer and other tabletop wargaming systems for years. What we're missing currently in that design is army lists. Obviously, 40k make big money out of this as they sell books of army lists, because they realize that if everybody just turned up in a free-for-all with all the miniatures they bought, then games would become really unbalanced in other ways. If you put one invulnerable unit for 2,000 points on one side, and then the other guy's only got 2,000 points worth of units that can't damage it at all, it's still not a fair fight despite being the same points. So I think we need a third variable in there, as it were, another resource to limit the exoticness of units that are being fielded. That's where the current game design is going. Is like we have exotic matter back in the game, something that you mine along with silver that allows you to field the better units, but less frequently than you might otherwise do, because it would imbalance the game.
Okay. So still a lot of variation between strategy and what you're deploying and how you set their priorities and whatnot. But do I take it that the effect of this is to try to limit situations where it just doesn't work, like the battle wouldn't work?
Yeah, there's a cheesing kind of thing where you find like, oh, hang on a minute, this unit here is so invulnerable that I needed one of them to attack the entire army that the other guy's got no weapons to hurt it. Mm-hmm. And it's that kind of cheesing we want to avoid. So if the other guy hasn't fielded anything with anything like the armor that this guy's got, and they'll be restricted from placing it in the first place. So I think just a second resource value that's associated with units will go a lot of the way to balancing that more. But we don't want to make it totally balanced, because we want turmoil and random destruction and occasional defeat from the jaws of victory occasions. We want the randomness. Mm-hmm. One of the things in the game that's been interesting is it's supposed to be deterministic, and that when a battle is played, it should replay exactly the same every single time the play button is pressed, given the initial starting conditions being the same. There's a bug in it at the moment, though, and that I haven't found it yet, but it's on the list. Very occasionally, it will diverge, just the tiniest divergence halfway through the battle. Something will just happen just in a different order, and the entire outcome of the battle changes based on that one tiny thing changing. And that's interesting, because what it means is when you think, well, this is an obvious pushover, they're just going to win. If the butterfly effect of one tiny thing happening out of order in the battle and totally change the outcome of the battle from that point onwards. That shows you that it's actually quite a good knife-edge design there. It's chaotic. It's not as straightforward. It is just predict who's going to win based on looking at what's going on. And that's really nice. It's just emerged from it all. It's like, oh, good. Success.
That is good, because otherwise you could basically play the game in a spreadsheet and do a calculation and say, oh, here's your army. I mean, I suppose it's more complicated than that, but.
Well, yeah, in some game systems you probably could do just that. But the sheer amount of possibility in initial starting conditions in Battledroid, it's all about your initial starting conditions. That's the whole game, is just designing. If you set these up to go here and these ones to go here, then strategy emerges from it. After the chaos, you see weird things happening, and it's like, oh, clever. You didn't expect it to emerge.
I'm curious, when you attack a territory now and you hit go, it seems like the battle is playing out in real time. Has it already been fully simulated on the server and is just sort of streaming to the client, or how does that work?
No. It was at one point fully simulated on the server, and then we would send back the result to the client, who would then play it back deterministically. However, this all fell apart when we moved to 3D, because we'd have to simulate the entire 3D world on the server, and that is much more complicated and time-consuming and memory-consumptive. So now we have a system where it's simulated in real time on the client, and the client just tells the server what the result was, and you're thinking, oh, it's going to be rife for cheating. And it is. So there's a couple of things to mitigate it, which they're all waiting in the wings. They're just going to be implemented soon. One is that if you lose a battle, we don't care. Nobody's going to send a result where they lost. We don't care about it. They say they've lost, but we assume they've lost already by default. The moment you click attack, it says you've lost until you get an update saying the battle's finished and you won.
Okay.
So if your game crashes, then you've automatically lost, basically. That's the default state. So we have this idea where a battle, once it's completed, goes into an unverified state, which is like you've won, but nobody's checked it yet. And the idea is that heuristically, we can look at the stats that have been reported and immediately discount people who've been cheating. It's just like, that's impossible. Mm-hmm. Bam. We also, of course, we check the initial starting conditions and the final end conditions to make sure that they're one's a subset of the other. So the army that is supposedly survived the battle should still be a subset of the army that invaded. So we know that something's amiss if they're awry. And of course, the initial battle is all verified as well. You checks the map, make sure the deployments are fine, all the points values are round up before it even accepts battle happening in the first place. So we get a battle in the unverified state. And the idea is then that any other player will be able to verify the battle by watching it. The different levels of verification. So the most verified a battle can be is if we watch the battle ourselves here at Puppygames. So we can actually have a dedicated server that's just going to pick up battles and verify that they get the same result. Just sitting in the background with the screen turned off. Well, we won't even bother rendering it. We'll just run the battles as fast as we can. And if providing the numbers come out exactly the same, battles verified, set in stone. The next best thing is a third party watches the battle. Just the act of watching it means we can check the numbers at the end, and if they agree, submit a third party verified status. Finally, the defender can go, oh, I've been attacked and lost my territory. He can watch the battle too. And if he gets the same results as well, it's like, yep, you lost fair and square. But they might get a different result because either a bug in on deterministic systems, which is why we haven't implemented all this stuff yet, or because the other guy cheated. Because you can literally say, yep, I won. It's just an remote method call. I won the battle. Okay, you did. And then we have to check it. So if the other guy watches this battle because he's got the same starting conditions and it's completely different, then go, well, I dispute it. The battle goes into dispute, at which point we'll look at it. So why has this battle come out with a dispute? And we'll then determine that something's wrong or not.
Okay. So most of the time, I mean, even though cheating could be common, like statistically, most of the games are going to run not cheating. And so really you're just trying to focus on the parts where there's a conflict or a dispute.
Exactly. So we narrowed down the amount of work we want to do at each step to the minimum number of having to deal with it things. There's not really any problem with cheating right now. There's not many people who want to cheat. But the game will get bigger. It'll attract more of the great unwatched, I call them. The rest of the internet will turn up, and eventually we'll get the griefers and the cheaters and the scammers and all that kind of thing, and they'll try and spoil it for everybody. We just want to make sure that there's a mechanism right in place, right at the beginning, predicting their arrival, dealing with them before they ruin it for everyone. And it might get more important when there's a few more stakes in place. So right now the game's just funsies, people are just blowing each other up to see if they can, but there are going to be things worth fighting for in the world sooner or later. And people might get a bit angry and het up about winning them.
Yeah, well, it's kind of understood at this phase where, it's the demo, it's the beta, things are going to get wiped. It's all about learning and feedback. It's different when, you've spent a month investing in a plan and a strategy, and now you feel like if the game's unfair at that point, that's a different scenario.
Yeah, well, unfair is one thing because it's unfair for everybody if it's unfair, but cheating is another matter. So we have a plan in place. We don't need to implement it yet because the scale of things is still very small, but it will go in there. And then we can start doing some clever stuff with gambling. So, you could wager 50,000 quatloons that you can attack this base or whatever. Yeah, right, I'll take your challenge and winner takes all.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which would be really quite fun, wouldn't it? To actually have some stakes in, feel so confident that your base is impenetrable. I'll put 200 gold on that. 200 gold says nobody can take my base. So all right then, and then we'll see how many people waste their time trying to win it.
Can I bet on somebody else's battle?
That would be interesting, but probably suspect it might fall foul of all kinds of laws.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
That might be a little too far outside the circle.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Well, next is lots more Battledroid. We're going to really focus on the game for the next 12 months. There's a lot of content we want to add to it. A lot of enhancements to it to make it even more exciting to play. More three-dimensional battlefields, crazier weaponry, cooler looking units that open up new strategies. All of these things. And also further reasons to play the game, such as artifacts we were going to scatter around the world for people to capture, just to show off. So stuff like that. And there's even a single player campaign now planned in the game. The old fans of Revenge of the Titans, we thought, let's have a single player game which you can alternately play in attack or defense against a set of pre-made bases or perhaps randomly generated, haven't been decided yet. So that would be a nice piece of DLC, just a whole 50 levels of single player campaign for people to enjoy. Yeah, we're going to obviously see what the next year brings on that front. Hopefully I'll be full time on it. So progress will be quite rapid. And after Battledroid, well, I don't know how long there's going to be after Battledroid because we might be at it for years yet if it's successful. if it really gets the kind of fan base that's bringing in a living, we'll keep on at it. We have other plans for the Voxel 3D engine. There's ideas around a Factorio idle game kind of thing, manufacturing game. Lots of little voxels whizzing around on it, little factory conveyor belts. That'd be quite fun. There's ideas for a 3D adventure-y type of game, a kind of arcade adventure in the voxel engine as well. That'd be nice.
Oh, the voxel thing just made me think of what's the game on PlayStation 3? I think it was like 3D Dot Heroes or something. It's like a voxel game, but you could design your own characters. It was like an RPG sort of. A friend of mine had it and he showed it to me. And there's like an in-game editor where you can create your own voxel character and animate it and stuff. But the idea is, you play the game, you like collect a sword, you go fight the dragon or whatever. And I thought it would be funny to animate like a Christ on the cross, and like his attack would be like slapping the crucifix together and stuff. He said he replayed the whole game as that character. He thought it was hilarious, because it's sort of like Jesus walking around with a sword and whack, 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 whack.
Did you know we have a holy hand grenade in Basingstoke?
I did not know that.
Somewhere deep in the bowels of Basingstoke, there's a church that you enter in a crypt somewhere in the church. You find at the end the holy hand grenade on an altar. And when it explodes, it's this huge animation of the cross and like a BFG 9000 going off and all the monsters die.
Do you have to wait for someone to read the manual before you can deploy it?
Yeah. 3 shall be the number you count to. Yeah, that's in there. A little thing to find. So yeah, lots of games planned. Who knows? If Battledroid actually makes proper money, then we might be a real studio one day. Might actually be able to afford people we can employ to write these games as well. That seems to be an extraordinarily high bar to reach to get to a point where you've got a studio with employees. I don't know how any of these studios, like 20 or 30 people, survive. We don't make enough money for one person to survive. We've been relatively successful. So just how on earth can you make that much money that you can employ 30 people all year round for years? It boggles me.
Yeah, I mean, even with where you're at, if you look at everybody trying to do games, you're still in kind of rarefied air where you are. Most people do it purely as a hobby, and that's fine. There's thousands of people, and there's new games, hundreds of new games every week being published that you don't even know about. Yeah, I don't know. Some luck, I guess.
Well, it's because there's got to be some magic source to it, but we haven't figured it out yet. But this may be the one. Maybe.
Maybe the problem is you're having fun. You need to just squeeze it down into a business formula.
I don't know if it's necessarily fun. It has seemed like quite a hard slog sometimes getting these things out, but we'll get there. I think that's why I've never been in the games industry. It would definitely cease to be fun if I had to do it every day, all the time, whether I wanted to or not.
Well, thanks very much for joining me, Cass, and good luck with Battledroid. Now you're past the Kickstarter, so you're kind of in whatever that next phase is, and you'll be releasing soon, and you've got this other mysterious thing that's the Hand of Fate, perhaps, that's going to come down and help you, maybe, that you can't talk about yet.
The Hand of Fate is going to do some big helping. I'll let you know. It'll be big enough news. We'll announce it everywhere.
This has been the Wilderness and the Wellspring podcast. You can find me on the service previously known as Twitter under the username @JeffLuntGames. You can also find me on Substack at wildernessandwellspring.substack.com. I want to thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.